They banned the human prince, but the princess refused to let him go. The ship arrived at dawn when the city was still quiet. Towers of glass and living metal caught the first light and threw it back like a slow, polite blaze. The human prince stepped down from the small transport with his hands folded in front of him. He wore the uniform of his people, plain, functional, a faded blue that had seen better days. He felt very small between the tall doors and the silent guards. They called him an outlaw here. They called him a curiosity. The council had spelled the word plainly, banned. He was to be kept where he would not upset their balance. The capital was built on graceful lines and careful law. People moved with a calm that felt practiced, as if every pause had been rehearsed. The prince had not expected such order. On his ship, the crew had told stories of the Empire's strange rules and formal kindness. They had warned him about the council and its old, stubborn ways. But none of that prepared him for the hush of the palace gardens, the way light fell across water, or the small things, birds that sang like bells, benches carved in loops that fit a person's weight exactly. He breathed in the clean air and tried to find calm in it. He was led to a guest wing reserved for those whose presence was tolerated but watched. The rooms were large and simple, with low furniture and shelves full of techniques and histories. A small window looked over a courtyard where the palace gardeners trimmed vines into patterns that repeated like a code. The prince had to remind himself how he had come to this place. A visit meant to open trade, a misunderstanding in the Senate, a fear of new blood. That had been enough for the council to press the ban. He was a symbol, and symbols made people afraid. From the high galleries, the princess watched him. She sat in a room with a view of the city and a map of its energy flows. The map hummed with faint light, a gentle pulse that the palace called the city's heartbeat. She was young but had the measured patience that comes from being raised to rule. She had read law, history, and the names of every governor in the empire. She knew what the council would expect of her, to behave with decorum, to accept the ban and show no favor. She also remembered the stories of other places and other kinds of people who were clever in ways the empire did not value. Her first sight of the prince did not start with fireworks. He walked with a cautious step and a tired dignity. He did not demand attention. He observed the garden, the workers, the machines without making them feel wrong. There was a steadiness in him that the princess identified, not the cold, mechanical kind the council prized, but a steady courage that was patient and curious. She felt a small, unexpected tug of interest. She instructed that his needs be met. Quietly, she asked a steward to ensure he had tools instead of more books. It was a small request, and the council would not notice such a small omission. The prince was given a loose set of instruments, simple things from his own world. A hammer, a spool of wire, some measuring tools. He spent the first day in a silent study, the instruments on his low table like questions waiting to be answered. He opened them and looked for ways to make a place better. When he worked, he seemed to enter a different rhythm. The palace was full of structured grace, but his hands moved in quick, thoughtful motions. He marked small problems as if they were puzzles. He rewired a shelf light that had flickered for months. He adjusted a latch that squeaked. A gardener's tiny water pump, which had annoyed the staff for weeks, became quiet and efficient under his fingers. Word of the small fixes moved through the guest wing like a pleasant scent. Servants began to speak of the human's steady hands. The princess watched more closely. She found excuses to pass near his wing, a report to deliver, a pot of tea that she said belonged to a deceased aunt. The prince noticed her visits as a surprise each time. At first, their conversations were short, polite. He asked about the city's way of storing light. She asked about the strange instrument he used to measure tension. They compared words that did not exactly match. He used metaphors her people did not know. She used phrases he found formal and round. Even in the small talk, they found a way to laugh at the differences. The council watched as well. They watched through the glass walls of their chambers and through the records that told them who moved where. The councilmen had seen alliances form like this before. They knew the danger of sympathy. They strengthened the band with new words. The prince was told he could not attend public functions. He was to be a visiting scholar at best, and nothing more. The princess heard the council's words and felt their edges. The ban was not just a rule, it was a test of loyalty. If she sided with him, she would risk being seen as reckless. But the princess had not come to rules without thought. She thought of the problem they had at the edge of the city, where ancient conduits delivered light but sometimes failed under strain. Engineers had tried to fix the old conduits for years. They had drawn in more protocols, more forms, more careful pauses. Nothing had broken their pattern. The princess had been there when night fell and a whole district dimmed. Citizens had lit lamps that smelled of smoke and old oil. The council had sighed and recorded dates. The princess had felt something else, a flicker of impatience. She had wished for someone who would not accept the old ways as the only ways, so she began to help him quietly. She sent him a map of the conduit lines under the eastern quarters, a place she believed no one would notice. She whispered a method she had read in a border tome about combining old mechanical levers with new pulse controls. These were small gifts, nothing the council could define as treason. The prince accepted them with a gratitude that was almost shy. He worked with the map and the levers, his ideas growing like a plant finding a new patch of light. The first test came sooner than either of them expected. A storm moved across the city like a slow animal. It brought wind that the architects had not accounted for, and a rain that filled channels meant for lesser weather. A pump station on the edge of the eastern quarters began to stutter. The lights there dimmed, then flashed, then dipped into darkness. Families prepared candles. The palace recorded the incident with its usual calm. The council sent messages that they had engineers on the way. The princess saw the pattern in her mind and sent a quiet note to the prince. There was no formal channel for such a message. She folded a paper and let a trusted steward carry it, a note that contained nothing but the word for the failed pump and a small mark she had drawn on the map. The prince understood immediately. He packed his basic tools and moved toward the eastern conduit with a small team of palace stewards who were told to escort a fragile scholar. What they found at the pump was not drama. It was a cluster of worn gears and corroded wiring, a subtle, fixable mess. The palace engineers had cataloged the pump for replacement, but had not acted because the budget was slow to flow. The prince set aside the heavy words of bureaucracy and knelt in the wet dust. He moved with a careful speed, checking threads and seals, lining up gears. The princess watched from a distance, wrapped in a plain cloak so that she would not call attention. He worked alone and then with his stewards. He fitted a small spacer he found in the palace supply, one of the tools she had seen him use. Then he ran a wire along a safer route than the engineers would have chosen. He adjusted a lever with a steady hand. When he finished, the pump breathed like a newly opened lung. Water flowed correctly. The light boxes across the eastern quarter caught again, and lamps that had been lit returned to their quiet, bright hum. People cheered softly in the streets, the kind of sound that rises when something ordinary becomes better. The council called the prince's success a coincidence. They praised the engineers who supervised the repair and whispered that no political shift should be allowed. The prince remained banned on paper, but the streets had a new story. They spoke of the human who had fixed the pump with clever hands and a humble smile. The princess listened to these stories as though they were jewels she had not known were there. She felt a steady warmth that was not fear but an expanding hope. Small changes began to happen because of that single repair. A market vendor began to stock pipes that matched the prince's spacer. Young apprentices asked to watch him work. He taught them in the way his people taught, practical, direct, and full of encouragement. The watchful eyes of the council sometimes found faults in him, but the citizens found value. The princess saw the balance tip, not in a loud revolution but in the quiet way trust grows when people share a light. She took a greater risk and invited him to a small public forum about city repairs. It was not a speech, but a place where citizens and engineers could bring issues. The council did not forbid such meetings, though they sent a subtle warning through the steward who carried the invitation. The prince spoke plainly there. He did not use arrogant words. He explained simple ideas and showed drawings that a child could understand. When he spoke about combining old gears with new pulse controls, people nodded. They could picture their own homes lit more safely, their own machines lasting longer. The forum became a place where the humans' ideas crossed with the Empire's archives. Inside the palace, the council's patience thinned. They argued in whispers about protocol and precedent, about how a human success might lead to a change they could not control. They were not wrong to worry. Change often arrives with new problems. The princess heard their words and did not dismiss them. She told herself that leadership meant weighing risk against need. Her support for the prince was not a denial of caution, but a choice to test it. She would not let him break the city. She would let him try to fix the parts the Empire had forgotten how to mend. In the evenings, the prince and the princess walked in the palace gardens under the same sky that hung over the city. They talked about small things, how light felt different in the morning, what bread tasted like when it was still warm from the oven. They spoke about their childhoods and how they learned the first rules they could not break. The prince spoke of places where storms were common and where people learned to build in ways that welcomed wind. The princess told stories of court rituals and old songs. Each story was a thread. They were building a rope. The palace staff watched their growing closeness with the quiet curiosity that people have for a slow unfolding. Some liked the idea of new ideas flowing into the empire. Others feared that the princess's favor might bend the balance of power. The council sent a written reminder of the ban to the prince, a formal sheet of law that made the air around him tighter. The princess took that paper and read it with her own hand. She did not tear it in front of anyone. She tucked it into a pocket and let it be a record she would answer later. For now, she answered in small ways. She let him use a workshop in the West Wing at night, a place where old clocks were kept. She arranged for a student from the university to be assigned as his assistant, a thin scholar who had more courage than rank. The prince accepted these gestures with a gentle appreciation. He wanted no court titles. He wanted only to learn and to make what was broken whole again. The people of the Eastern Quarter remembered when the lights returned. They gave the prince a small gift, a carved ring of wood so smooth it fit around his thumb like a promise. He accepted it and put it on without ceremony. The princess noticed and smiled. She understood that he had become more than a visitor. He was becoming a neighbor in an empire that had feared outsiders for so long that it had forgotten the value neighbors could bring. The ban remained on paper. The council practiced the art of looking stern and saying little. The palace continued its routines. Yet the city changed in ways that are hard to mark. A boy who fixed carts offered his services to a widow for free for a month. A market stall ordered spare gears in new sizes. An old engineer taught an apprentice to share plans. Small acts of trust traveled like seeds on a warm wind. The princess often sat in her room at night, watching the city light blink steadily, and thought of how a single human had moved into the pattern like a new note in an old song. She knew the council could tighten their hold at any time. She knew there were limits no map could redraw. But she also knew something simpler. A city that learns to listen has a better chance of growing. The prince had come under a ban. The princess was not allowed to change the law alone, but she could open a door, hand him a tool, and let the people see what he could do. That small opening had already begun to matter. When the prince tightened the last bolt on a quiet machine in the West workshop and looked up, he saw the princess standing in the doorway. He wiped his hands on a cloth and bowed with a smile that asked no permission. She walked in and stood beside him. They did not speak of councils or bans. They only set the next idea on the workbench, a plan to keep more pumps working before storms could darken a street. It was modest. It was honest. It was enough to start the next small change. The morning arrived with a soft light that spilled over the city like a gentle tide. The streets, already waking from their night of calm, hummed with quiet activity. Merchants opened shutters, children ran past fountain steps, and the air carried a mixture of spices, warm bread, and the faint hum of machinery. In the West Wing workshop, the human prince was already at work. His hands, steady and careful, moved over a small, intricate device designed to measure water pressure in the palace conduits. Each movement was deliberate, each adjustment thoughtful, as if he were speaking to the machine in a language only he could understand. The princess entered without announcement, as she had learned to do. She had found that the prince preferred the freedom to work without too many eyes on him. She walked quietly to the corner of the room, observing him for a moment. He did not look up, but she knew he had noticed her presence, the slight pause in his rhythm a signal that he acknowledged her silently. She smiled, a small curve of lips that conveyed trust more than words ever could. "Good morning," she said softly, her voice blending with the hum of the workshop. The prince looked up then, meeting her gaze. "Morning," he replied simply, returning to his task. "I think the readings are off again. The older conduits need a gentle touch or they overreact." The princess moved closer to examine the device, noting the careful way he handled the dials. "It's strange," she said, "that something so small can affect the city so much." "That's how it often works," he answered. "A small mistake in the wrong place can ripple across everything." She nodded, understanding more than she let him know. Leadership, she thought, was often like that. Small choices could ripple across the lives of millions. Yet she also realized that in the prince, she saw someone who approached problems differently than her council or her engineers. His way was not only practical but inventive, seeing solutions where others only saw obstacles. Over the next few days, the prince's work grew more visible. The eastern quarter had been improved by his first repair, and now other districts began to see small, steady changes. Water pumps worked more reliably, energy conduits glowed steadily, and minor mechanical problems that had lingered for years began to disappear under his care. The citizens whispered of the human prince who had arrived banned but had begun to improve their lives quietly, without spectacle, without demanding recognition. The council, however, remained uneasy. They had expected the ban to keep him isolated, to prevent him from influencing anything or anyone. Yet the opposite seemed to be happening. The prince's reputation grew in the streets, among workers, apprentices, and even minor officials. The council sent messages through formal channels, reminding the princess of her duties, warning her that continued support of the human could be seen as disobedience. The princess read these messages carefully. She did not respond immediately. Instead, she watched the city, watched the citizens, watched the prince. She saw that his presence brought more than repair and invention. It brought hope. People began to believe that problems could be solved, that the empire could bend without breaking. She understood that this kind of influence was more powerful than any law the council could issue. One afternoon, the prince received a message from the palace archives. A section of the oldest energy grid, deep beneath the city, was in danger of failing. The engineers had noted the risk but had delayed action due to the complexity of the repair and the high cost. The prince studied the diagrams carefully. He noticed that the system had been designed with rigid connections that could not easily adapt to change. He began to think about a way to introduce flexibility without altering the original design too drastically. The princess, aware of his plan, suggested he consult a small group of apprentices who had shown talent and curiosity. They were eager to learn, and the prince welcomed their help. Together, they created a simple device that could stabilize the older conduits during periods of high stress. It was a delicate operation, requiring careful timing and coordination, and the prince guided the team with patience and clarity. When the day of the repair arrived, the city held its breath. Citizens were used to quiet competence, not to the idea of a banned human leading a critical operation. The prince and his team descended into the narrow tunnels beneath the city. The air was thick with dust, and the walls were lined with conduits that had seen decades of wear. The prince moved confidently, checking each connection, adjusting his device, and instructing the apprentices with calm authority. Above ground, the princess watched from a monitoring station. Her hands rested on the rail as she observed the live feedback from the tunnels. She could see the changes in pressure, the subtle shifts in energy flow, and the way the conduits responded to the new stabilizer. She felt a surge of pride and relief as she saw the system hold steady under conditions that had previously caused failure. The repair was a success. The energy flowed evenly throughout the city, and the citizens remained unaware of the disaster that had been avoided. The prince emerged from the tunnels covered in dust but smiling. The apprentices cheered quietly, their eyes shining with admiration. The princess approached him, her expression warm. "You did it," she said simply. "We did it," he replied, gesturing toward the apprentices. They learned quickly. Their teamwork became a model for cooperation. The city began to see the value in combining the old ways with new ideas, in respecting tradition while embracing innovation. Word of the prince's success reached the council once more. They debated how to respond, some insisting that the ban remain strictly enforced, others noting the undeniable improvements and growing public favor. The princess continued to support the prince, arranging discreet meetings with key citizens, engineers, and apprentices. She introduced him to scholars who had been overlooked, to inventors whose ideas were unconventional. Each encounter strengthened the bond between human and empire, showing that intelligence, creativity, and courage could transcend boundaries of species and law. The prince, for his part, remained humble. He accepted praise quietly, always redirecting attention to the people who assisted him. He never sought power or position. He only sought to understand, to improve, and to share knowledge. His simplicity and sincerity won the trust of many, creating a network of allies who quietly admired his presence. At night, the princess and the prince would often walk in the palace gardens. The fountains shimmered under the moonlight, and the air carried the scent of flowers that bloomed only in this city. They spoke of the day's work, of discoveries, and sometimes of their hopes for the future. These conversations grew more personal over time, though always respectful and thoughtful. They shared stories of their homelands, of childhood lessons, and of the principles that guided their actions. The council continued to watch, issuing occasional reminders of the ban. Yet they could not deny the changes they observed. The city was quieter, more efficient, and its people more confident. The citizens had begun to look at the human prince not as an outsider to be feared, but as someone who could contribute in meaningful ways. His presence challenged old prejudices and inspired new thinking. The princess realized that she could not simply let the council dictate every action. Leadership, she understood, required courage to support what was right, even in the face of disapproval. She supported the prince openly in small, careful ways, ensuring that his influence could continue without provoking outright confrontation. She trusted his judgment and admired his determination. The prince's efforts extended beyond mechanical repairs. He observed patterns in the city's social and economic networks, suggesting minor adjustments to improve efficiency and fairness. He encouraged apprentices to share knowledge freely, fostering an environment where innovation was respected. Slowly, the empire began to adapt, recognizing that collaboration between human and alien minds could bring lasting benefits. One morning, as they walked through the eastern quarter, the prince paused to watch children playing with small machines he had helped repair. The princess joined him, her gaze following the same path. "They are learning more than I could have imagined," he said. "They are learning more than I could have imagined, too," she replied, smiling. "They are learning to trust ideas, not just rules." The human prince had arrived banned, under strict orders to remain distant and silent. Yet in a few short weeks, he had begun to reshape the city in ways that were subtle but profound. The princess watched this transformation with a quiet satisfaction, knowing that the changes would ripple far beyond the palace walls. Together, they were building a bridge between human creativity and alien order, a bridge that no council decree could easily dismantle. As the sun set, painting the city in soft shades of gold and orange, the prince and the princess returned to the workshop. Tools were laid out, diagrams spread across tables, and apprentices gathered to discuss new ideas. There was no rush, no urgency, only steady progress. The city outside thrived quietly, the citizens unaware of the careful planning that kept their lives smooth and bright. The princess realized that leadership was not about asserting power over others, but about recognizing potential and nurturing it. The human prince had come as an outsider, a forbidden presence, yet he had already taught her lessons in patience, creativity, and courage. She felt a quiet hope that this partnership would continue to grow, and that together they could face the challenges that lay ahead for their empire. The ban remained, written and official, but it held little weight against the work of human hands guided by steady mind and the support of a princess who refused to let fear dictate her choices. The prince had not sought recognition, but it had found him anyway. And in this quiet, measured way, the first steps of change had begun, promising a future where barriers of species and law might bend in the light of ingenuity and trust. The city had grown quieter in the mornings, not because people were resting, but because the improvements made by the human prince and his apprentices allowed life to flow more smoothly. Streets that had once been prone to minor disruptions now hummed with steady rhythm, and small businesses flourished without the constant interruptions of failing pumps or erratic energy conduits. The princess walked among the people more often now, sometimes unannounced, to see firsthand the changes taking place. She noticed the subtle ways in which citizens had begun to rely on and respect the human prince's presence. One morning, she arrived at a bustling market in the eastern quarter. The sun shone over the stalls, illuminating the variety of goods and the careful organization of the merchants. She observed a small cart that had once been rickety and unreliable. Now it moved smoothly, its wheels aligned by the prince's guidance, carrying fruits and supplies more efficiently than before. Children played nearby with a small mechanical toy the prince had helped repair, their laughter echoing lightly between the stone walls. The princess noticed a man struggling to lift a heavy crate onto a stall. Before she could react, a young apprentice who had been working under the prince appeared and offered assistance. The apprentice moved with confidence and patience, lifting the crate with care while instructing the man on proper balance and support. The princess recognized the lesson she had seen in the prince. Practical knowledge shared with kindness and clarity could empower anyone. Later in the palace, the prince prepared for another critical project. A section of the city's oldest water reservoir had shown signs of strain, and the council had delayed action, citing bureaucracy and concern for the cost. The princess, understanding the urgency, sent a discreet note to the prince with detailed schematics and a map marking the reservoir's most vulnerable points. He studied the materials carefully, noting weak valves and worn supports. He devised a plan that would reinforce the reservoir without disrupting its current operations. He called a meeting with his team of apprentices, explaining the steps he would take. His voice was calm and his instructions precise. Each apprentice listened intently, taking careful notes and asking questions when necessary. The prince encouraged discussion, allowing the team to contribute ideas and suggest small modifications. In doing so, he fostered a sense of ownership and responsibility among them, teaching not only repair techniques, but also leadership and problem-solving skills. When the day of the repair arrived, the prince and his team descended into the reservoir tunnels. The air was damp and smelled faintly of stone and old water. The walls, slick from years of use, reflected the light from portable lamps. The prince moved with steady hands, checking each valve and pipe. He instructed the apprentices to adjust supports, tighten connections, and observe the flow of water. Above ground, the princess monitored their progress from a secure station. She watched the readings and noted each improvement as the pressure stabilized and water flow became even. Citizens in nearby districts remained unaware of the potential disaster averted, and the city continued its daily rhythm without interruption. The prince's careful guidance had ensured the reservoir would last for many more years without failure. After completing the repair, the prince emerged from the tunnels, his face covered in a fine layer of dust and water droplets. The apprentices followed, their expressions bright with pride. The princess approached him, offering a quiet word of praise. "You have done it again," she said, her voice carrying both admiration and relief. "We did it together," he replied, gesturing to the apprentices. They worked diligently. The princess noticed the council observing from a distance, their faces set in measured concern. They had anticipated trouble, yet the city remained calm and efficient. The prince's presence, once forbidden, now demonstrated the value of human ingenuity. The council had no choice but to acknowledge, if only privately, the positive effects of his work. In the following days, the prince continued to collaborate with both apprentices and engineers. He suggested minor changes to the city's infrastructure, combining human innovation with alien precision. Each adjustment was carefully considered, tested, and implemented with minimal disruption. The city began to see the benefits of this collaboration. Water flowed more efficiently, energy conduits functioned smoothly, and small mechanical problems disappeared under the guidance of human knowledge. The princess and the prince spent time reviewing the results of their work. They walked through the city streets, observing how people responded to the improvements. Merchants noted fewer interruptions, apprentices expressed excitement over learning new techniques, and ordinary citizens began to feel confident in the reliability of their surroundings. The changes were subtle but powerful, creating a sense of stability and optimism throughout the city. The council, still uneasy, debated how to maintain authority while acknowledging the benefits of the human prince's contributions. Some members argued that the ban should remain strictly enforced, while others recognized that the city itself had changed in ways they could not control. The princess listened carefully, understanding the delicate balance between tradition and progress. She knew that she had to navigate these political waters with care, while continuing to support the prince in his efforts. One afternoon, a message arrived indicating that a remote district faced the risk of flooding due to heavy rain. The existing water channels were inadequate, and the local engineers had been unable to devise a solution. The princess and the prince examined the maps and schematics together. The prince suggested using modular supports and adjustable gates, a method that allowed flexibility while maintaining the integrity of the channels. The princess approved the plan and arranged for the apprentices to assist. When the team arrived at the district, they found that the channels were overgrown and partially blocked. The prince coordinated the cleaning and repair, demonstrating techniques to reinforce the gates and stabilize the flow. The apprentices worked alongside him, learning to adapt to unexpected challenges while following his guidance. Local citizens watched with curiosity and eventually offered help, eager to participate in the improvement of their neighborhood. By evening, the district's water system was stabilized, and the flooding risk had been mitigated. Residents expressed gratitude quietly, aware that the human prince's expertise had made a difference in their daily lives. The princess observed the outcome, noting how the collaborative effort had strengthened both the infrastructure and the community. As the days passed, the prince's influence extended beyond mechanical improvements. He encouraged open discussion among apprentices and engineers, fostering an environment of shared knowledge and mutual respect. He demonstrated that problem-solving could be collaborative, not hierarchical, and that learning from mistakes was a vital part of progress. The princess recognized the importance of this approach, understanding that empowering others was a form of leadership as essential as enforcing rules. Evenings were spent in the palace gardens, where the prince and princess continued their quiet conversations. They spoke of ideas, possibilities, and principles that guided their actions. These discussions were not about politics, but about understanding and vision. The princess found herself learning from the prince's perspective, appreciating the clarity and simplicity in his approach to complex problems. The prince valued her insight and knowledge of the empire, creating a mutual respect that strengthened their collaboration. Citizens began to notice subtle changes in leadership as well. The princess's visible support of the prince signaled a willingness to embrace new ideas. Her actions encouraged others to observe, learn, and participate in the process of improvement. People began to suggest solutions to minor problems, inspired by the practical demonstrations of human ingenuity. The city, once constrained by rigid routines, experienced a quiet transformation, guided by collaboration and respect for knowledge. The council, though still cautious, could not deny the results. Improvements were evident across multiple districts, and public opinion shifted subtly in favor of the princess and the human prince. While the ban technically remained in effect, the practical reality was that his presence had become valuable and difficult to ignore. The city itself had begun to adapt, blending human and alien methods in ways that created greater efficiency and stability. One evening, the princess and prince visited a small apprentice workshop where children experimented with mechanical models. The prince encouraged them to test their ideas, guiding them through trial and error with patience. The children responded with excitement, eager to see their invention succeed. The princess observed the learning process, noting how confidence grew alongside skill. "It is remarkable how quickly they adapt," the princess said. "They are curious," the prince replied. Curiosity is stronger than fear. When people want to understand, they can achieve almost anything. The princess reflected on these words. She realized that the success of the prince's efforts extended beyond machines and infrastructure. It inspired a new approach to thinking, one that valued exploration, creativity, and collaboration. The human prince, once banned and feared, had become a catalyst for growth in both the city and the people. The prince's humility and focus on practical solutions won him respect quietly but consistently. Citizens spoke of his work with admiration, apprentices shared lessons they had learned, and minor officials began to implement improvements inspired by his methods. The princess continued to support him, ensuring that the council's restrictions did not impede meaningful progress. Together, the princess and prince worked to identify areas in the city where human ingenuity could complement alien precision. They explored forgotten districts, inspected aging infrastructure, and developed strategies to enhance efficiency. Each success reinforced the value of collaboration, demonstrating that innovation and tradition could coexist. As the sun set over the city, painting the towers in shades of orange and gold, the princess and prince returned to the palace. The streets below moved with calm efficiency, citizens going about their evening routines without worry or interruption. The princess understood that leadership required foresight, courage, and the willingness to support those who offered solutions, even when tradition resisted change. The prince, standing beside her, represented a new possibility. His presence showed that knowledge, creativity, and steady determination could overcome barriers and improve lives without force or conflict. The ban remained on paper, but its power had diminished in the face of tangible results. The city thrived, the apprentices learned, and the citizens quietly embraced a brighter, more reliable future. In the quiet of the evening, the princess and prince discussed plans for future projects. They spoke of water channels, energy conduits, and the training of new apprentices. Their conversation was calm, measured, and full of purpose. They knew challenges lay ahead, but the progress they had achieved provided confidence and direction. The city had begun to change, not through loud decrees or public battles, but through steady, thoughtful action. The human prince, once banned and underestimated, had become a vital force for improvement. The princess's willingness to support him, quietly but consistently, ensured that these changes would continue and grow. As night fell, the lights of the city glimmered steadily, reflecting the results of collaboration and understanding. The princess and prince stood side by side, observing the city they were helping to shape. They understood that the journey was far from over, but each step forward was proof that courage, ingenuity, and mutual respect could overcome even the strictest of bans. The city slept peacefully, unaware of the careful guidance that kept it safe and efficient. The prince and princess, however, remained vigilant and hopeful. Their work, grounded in knowledge, trust, and quiet determination, promised a future where human and alien collaboration could flourish. The ban, while still written, could not undo the impact of their efforts, and the city had already begun to move toward a brighter, more resilient tomorrow. The sun rose slowly over the city, casting a soft golden light on the streets and towers that had begun to hum with life. The citizens moved through their routines, some carrying baskets of bread, others guiding children along paths that had once been uneven and unpredictable. The city had grown stronger and more resilient in the weeks since the human prince's arrival, and the quiet changes were felt in every corner, from the smallest alleyway to the tallest tower. In the palace, the princess walked alongside the prince as they inspected the latest improvements. He carried his small toolkit, as usual, and moved with the calm confidence that had begun to inspire both apprentices and citizens alike. They examined a series of newly reinforced water channels that ran beneath the city's eastern quarter. The prince pointed out a minor misalignment, and together they adjusted the supports to ensure the flow remained steady during the coming rains. "It's remarkable how much difference a small adjustment can make," the princess said, her eyes following the line of the water. "Small things often have the largest effect," the prince replied. "A single weak point can disrupt an entire system. Strength comes from attention to the details." They moved on to a section of the energy grid, where old conduits had been upgraded with the prince's guidance. Engineers worked alongside apprentices, checking voltages and flow rates, learning from the methods the prince had introduced. The princess noted how naturally people now collaborated, sharing ideas and suggestions without fear of reprimand. The city itself seemed to breathe more easily, each part functioning in harmony with the others. The council had grown increasingly aware of the prince's influence. Members who had once spoken sharply against him now hesitated, recognizing the tangible improvements his presence had brought. Some whispered that the city had never been so orderly and efficient, even in the reigns of previous rulers. Others feared that the princess's support of the human prince might shift power in subtle ways that were difficult to control. Yet the ban remained in effect on paper, a formal declaration that carried less weight with each passing day. Despite the council's unease, the princess continued her quiet support. She arranged meetings where the prince could collaborate with both apprentices and senior engineers, ensuring that his insights reached those who could implement meaningful changes. She trusted his judgment and admired his ability to balance innovation with respect for the existing systems. The citizens, meanwhile, began to see the prince not as an outsider, but as someone who contributed to the city's well-being. One afternoon, a sudden storm swept across the city. Rain fell in steady sheets, and wind pushed against the buildings with unexpected force. The older sections of the city, where the water channels and conduits had been weakest, were at risk of flooding and power outages. The princess quickly summoned the prince, who immediately gathered his team of apprentices and engineers. Together, they moved through the streets, inspecting vulnerable areas and reinforcing supports where needed. The prince worked calmly, issuing instructions with precision and clarity. Apprentices followed his lead, adjusting gates and valves, clearing debris, and monitoring pressure levels. Citizens who had been affected by previous storms watched with quiet admiration, recognizing that this time the city would hold. The princess supervised from key points, coordinating communication and ensuring resources were available. Her presence reinforced the unity of the team, bridging the gap between leadership and action. By nightfall, the storm had passed. The city remained intact, the conduits and channels functioning as they should. Citizens emerged from their homes to see that their streets were safe and their lights steady. The prince and his team received quiet gratitude from those they had helped, their work acknowledged not with fanfare but with respectful recognition. The council convened soon after, their expressions a mixture of relief and unease. They could not deny the effectiveness of the prince's guidance, nor could they ignore the respect he had earned among both apprentices and citizens. Some members argued that the ban should be lifted entirely, recognizing that his presence was an asset rather than a threat. Others remained cautious, fearing that full acceptance might encourage challenges to their authority. The princess listened to the council's debate with patience. She knew that the city's safety and well-being must come first, and that the prince's influence had already proven its value. She spoke calmly, emphasizing the importance of collaboration, trust, and the practical results that had been achieved. Her words carried weight, reflecting both her insight as a leader and her understanding of the human prince's abilities. "His work is not about power," she said, addressing the council. "It is about solutions, about learning, and about guiding others to do their best. We cannot ignore what has been accomplished because of fear or tradition." Some council members nodded reluctantly, while others remained silent. The ban was discussed, but the city itself had already made its decision through the improved flow of water, the steady energy grid, and the growing confidence of its citizens. The human prince had proven that capability and ingenuity could not be contained by words alone. In the following weeks, the prince's contributions expanded beyond infrastructure. He worked with apprentices on small inventions, developing tools and devices that simplified daily tasks for citizens. He collaborated with scholars to adapt old knowledge into new applications, bridging gaps between human methods and alien precision. The princess supported these initiatives, facilitating access to resources and ensuring that their work reached those who could implement it effectively. The citizens noticed the changes, even if they did not understand all the technical details. Streets were cleaner, water flowed steadily, and energy was reliable. Small markets thrived, children learned with enthusiasm, and apprentices gained confidence in their abilities. The city moved with a quiet assurance, guided by careful planning, collaboration, and steady hands. One evening, the princess and prince walked through a section of the city that had recently benefited from their efforts. The streets were alive with people moving calmly and efficiently. Children played near fountains, Merchants arranged their goods with care, and apprentices demonstrated newly repaired devices to curious citizens. The city felt alive, not chaotic but confident and capable. "It is different now," the princess said softly. "People move with purpose, yet without fear. They trust the systems around them and they trust each other." "They have learned to rely on what works," the prince replied, "and to see that improvement is possible. Small actions, steady effort, they make a difference when people believe in them." The princess considered this, realizing that the prince's influence extended far beyond the technical work he performed. He had introduced a culture of careful observation, patience, and shared responsibility. People were learning not only to maintain systems, but to think critically and creatively about solutions. The city had begun to grow stronger because its citizens had become more confident in their abilities. As days turned into weeks, the prince's presence became a part of the city's fabric. Apprentices continued to learn from him, engineers adapted to his methods, and citizens experienced the benefits of reliable infrastructure. The princess maintained her quiet support, ensuring that the council's restrictions did not prevent meaningful collaboration. Together, they had created an environment where knowledge and ingenuity could flourish without fear or conflict. One afternoon, the prince and princess visited a remote district where the water channels had once been unreliable. They found that the improvements implemented earlier had held strong, even during recent heavy rains. Residents welcomed them with quiet gratitude, sharing how the changes had made daily life easier and safer. The princess observed the interactions, noting how the citizens' confidence reflected not only improved infrastructure, but also the human prince's respectful guidance. The prince spoke with the residents, listening carefully to their experiences and suggestions. He encouraged them to continue observing and reporting minor issues before they became major problems. The princess assisted, providing insight into the empire's methods and offering guidance where needed. The collaboration between human and alien knowledge became a model for other districts, demonstrating the value of combined skills and perspectives. Back at the palace, the council continued to discuss the human prince's role. Some members were impressed by the tangible results, while others remained concerned about precedent and authority. The princess, understanding both perspectives, emphasized the practical achievements and the benefits to the city. She argued that the prince's presence had strengthened the empire, improved citizen well-being, and fostered innovation, without undermining the council's authority. "Leadership is not only about rules," she said. "It is about recognizing potential, supporting talent, and ensuring the city thrives. He has done this without seeking power for himself, and in doing so, he strengthens us all." The council reluctantly agreed to relax certain restrictions, allowing the prince greater access to projects and resources. While the ban technically remained in effect, its influence had weakened, and the city itself had already embraced the prince's presence as beneficial. The human prince had become a respected figure, admired for his knowledge, patience, and ability to guide others toward success. Evenings in the palace gardens remained a time for reflection and discussion. The princess and prince spoke of lessons learned, plans for further improvements, and the principles that guided their actions. Their conversations were thoughtful, measured, and grounded in mutual respect. The prince valued the princess's insight and understanding of the empire, while the princess appreciated the clarity and creativity of his human perspective. Citizens continued to observe the changes quietly. Streets were safer, energy and water systems functioned reliably, and apprentices demonstrated new skills with confidence. The city had become more resilient, not through dramatic reforms, but through steady effort, collaboration, and shared responsibility. The human prince had arrived banned, yet he had become an integral part of the city's progress. The princess reflected on the journey they had undertaken. She realized that leadership required courage, foresight, and the willingness to support those who offered solutions, even in the face of opposition. The prince's steady presence, combined with her careful guidance, had transformed not only the city's systems, but also the culture of learning and innovation within it. One night, as the city lights blinked steadily across the towers and streets, the princess and prince stood side by side, observing the results of their work. The citizens slept peacefully, unaware of the careful planning and collaboration that had made their lives easier and safer. The city had grown stronger, more confident and more capable, guided by knowledge, creativity, and mutual respect. The ban, though still written, had little power against the practical achievements of the human prince and the princess's quiet support. Together, they had demonstrated that courage, ingenuity, and steady effort could overcome barriers, inspire growth, and strengthen an entire city. The journey had been long, filled with careful observation, small improvements, and shared learning. But the results were clear. The empire was stronger, the citizens were safer, and the collaboration between human and alien knowledge had proven that meaningful progress could flourish even in the face of rules designed to restrict it. The prince, once banned and underestimated, had become a symbol of what could be achieved through steady work, collaboration, and trust. The princess, through her support and guidance, had shown that true leadership required courage, insight, and the willingness to embrace change when it served the greater good. Together, they had built a foundation for continued growth, innovation, and understanding, a foundation that would benefit the city and its people for years to come. As the first light of the new day touched the towers, the princess and prince returned to their work, not as ruler and visitor, but as partners in shaping a city that had learned to thrive through cooperation, ingenuity, and respect. The city moved forward, guided by careful hands, wise minds, and the quiet determination of those who refused to be limited by fear or old rules. The future was uncertain, as all futures are, but for the first time it was filled with promise and potential, a future built by steady effort, shared knowledge, and the courage to stand together. They banned the human prince, but the princess refused to let him go.